Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Babbling Irons. This is the Have Your Say section where we're going to have some fans of West Ham, obviously, on the show to kind of talk through the trials and tribulations of being a West Ham fan. As we know, there are often many. It's been another interesting week being a West Ham fan. Also, today saw David Gold lay to rest as well. So, obviously, rest in peace there. Regardless of your personal feelings, I think it's been quite good as to the respect a lot of West Ham fans have given, regardless of personal feelings to the situation. So, yeah, that's been an actual quite a positive, really, because we all know how that possibly could have gone. But window's closed. We brought in one player for the first team, one for the under-21s. And we go into a quite a heavy set of games in the next three, and one after that is just as important. So, before we start, lads, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
I'm all right, mate. I'm all right. I'm getting ready for Newcastle. For me personally, I think we know where we're at against Newcastle. I think people have sort of pussyfooted around the last three games, and I think when we're going to go up against a decent side, and we're going to see what we're all about. Really?
Yeah, completely agreed. What about you, Scout?
Well, as you've just said, that's going to be the first real test we've had in a while.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it is the litmus test. There's been a lot of talk about how well we've played, but ultimately we've played against a very poor Everton team. Probably the worst team we've played all year. So it's kind of hard to say whether it's turning a corner. You know, Brentford again, that was another win, but that was their B team. And we only had one shot, I think, as well in that game on target. And obviously then Derby, who tactically were very naive. So it's a bit difficult to say where we are really at the moment, I think. And I guess, do you guys think that Moyes is turning it around? Do you think he is getting players back on side? Or do you just think that we can't draw any conclusions until probably we've had the next two games?
For me, like I made it short and sweet. He hasn't turned no corner yet for me. Far from it. He's still on the road, and the corner's miles up the road yet. Do you know what I'm saying? I think the next three games will decide it for me. If we set up in a way just to get our asses beaten, then he ain't changed nothing. He's just blagged it basically to a way that, let's be honest, against sides that West Ham should be beating with playing against second string sides and a League One side. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So we will see on Saturday night if West Ham have turned the corner. If West Ham go to Newcastle, put in a positive performance, win, lose or draw, and we look good, then I could accept that. If we go up there and we set up in a way that we're just going to defend and hope to try and get something, then he hasn't changed anything, in my opinion.
Yep. How about you, Scout? How do you see it?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see, like, when the likes of Skamaka get back fit and Ings is fit, how is he going to embed them into a team? Is he going to go maybe two up? Is he going to stick with Antonio? Even I thought he played very well the other night for the first time in quite a while. It's just, how is he going to make it gel with the players he's brought in? That's really interesting me.
Yeah, so how would you, going into the Newcastle game or even beyond that, if everyone was fit, how would you be setting up from here on out?
I think, honestly, our best bet right now, because, if Zuma's back fit, they're only just fit, aren't they? None of them are going to be operating at 100%. And it doesn't seem like a lot of our team have been all season. So I think that he'll take the safe approach, or I think we should, with the five at the back formation. Emerson at left wing back has to be. It can't be Cresswell. Then I think you've got to go with three centre backs, which is Zuma in the centre, Aguerd left, and Kera right. And then you're mixing up between who's on better form, Johnson or Soufal for right wing back. I think you go from there and possibly play with a two up top in that system.
Yeah, so who, all being well, everyone was fit, who would be your kind of two up top?
Well, that's a very tough question at the moment, because we haven't seen how Ings is going to fare. Because I think if we don't get anything from him right now when he's fit, then what was the point in the signing?
Yeah.
Because I think, and also you've got to get Skamaka in there. You've got to. So Skamaka and Ings maybe, but then you're going to say, well, Bowen's just coming back into form now. So
yeah, and you got obviously Ings is. I think we broke the bank on that wage. I think he's our most expensive player in terms of wage. I think could be up to potentially 150k a week in total.
Yeah.
So he's not really a player you can put on the bench really when you think of that type of level of wage. So it does beg the question as to whether we're going to swap to a 3-2-3. Oh, sorry, well, a 3 at the back, maybe a kind of a 4 in the middle, and then, or even a 5 in the middle, and then kind of 2 up top. It's kind of, it's not the type of wage you can comfortably put on the bench, but I suppose it's a deal brought in to bring an immediate response and goals, obviously in our position to try and get us out of relegation. So obviously if we do get out of relegation, I suppose it's a fair wage. Would you guys agree?
Yeah. I would agree on that. The only thing I would say is I would actually put Bowen up there with Skamaka. I won't go with Ings. I won't go with Antonio. I'll go with Bowen from there, really. I think Bowen's a better player. I think we discussed it before. But when he keeps cutting inside, I think he's pretty pointless. He doesn't really beat a man anymore. Like he used to last season. This season, he doesn't really do it as much. I think Bowen and Skamaka wouldn't be a bad shout for me. I think like the little and large sort of combination works well. I think Ings, for me, is a good player. He is, but is he going to be good for us? Like we need him to hit the ground now, and that's a worry. And I think Antonio, for me, I would have him on the right. I really would. I don't think Antonio's the striker that we need anymore. I think he's the winger that we need when Bowen has to be moved or has to be replaced. So what we need is whatever we go with has to work straight away. It has to work because we're running out of games. I know we've still got 19 games, but if we're not scoring any goals in the Prem and we're struggling, then we're going to need Ings to come in and try and save us. That's going to be difficult, really, to put that pressure on that signing to come in and try and save us.
Yeah, and you make the point we've got 19 games, but after the next 3, feasibly, we could be in the bottom 3 or even bottom of the table if we don't get the results that we ideally need. So, as you say, there has to be this immediate response in the team. And, looking forward to the Newcastle game, what would you guys class as an acceptable result? Because obviously at the moment we need points. So if you were the board looking at the situation and looking at Moyes, what would you say is an acceptable result, at least to give him, I guess, a stay of execution potentially?
For me, I need to see a performance at Newcastle. I need to see something different that I've not seen this season. We're going to go up against a side that are in form, a side that are defensively strong, a side that are competing for top 4, and we've got to go up there and we've got to make a statement, so to speak. Do you know what I mean? I can't see West Ham going up there and just surrendering. Do you know what I mean? I think the next 3 games, if I go with how I feel, I think the next 3 games are bad in the terms of West Ham getting anything out of them. I think the Chelsea one that we could get something out of, right? It's a London derby, it's at home, it's a sort of game West Ham would need if we've just lost to Newcastle. Obviously, the Spurs game is we just don't win there. That's one thing we just don't do. It's once in the eclipse when we go to Spurs and win. So I am fearing the next 3 games because, like you say, if we're at the bottom of the league, one thing with West Ham, they struggle when they're trying to catch teams. Do you know what I'm saying? When West Ham are above that station, they're all right. They're not too bad. When West Ham start getting adrift, then they start struggling a little bit. So it's a big game on Saturday. It really is. And if we can go up there and get a draw, I'll take a draw as long as we definitely get something against Chelsea. If we go up there and lose and we get a point against Chelsea, it just isn't enough, in my opinion. It really isn't.
Yeah, that's fair point. Scout, what about you?
I think all of us fans are just dying to see a performance where you think, cool, we gave it a good go today. We really gave it a good go. So I'd love to come away from the Newcastle game with points, but at bare minimum, I want to feel like we've gone there to try and get maximum points.
Yeah, so if you was to approach the game, obviously I know we kind of talked about it, but how ideally do you think that we can get something out of Newcastle? Because fortunately, it looks like they've got a couple of players out now. Guimaraes looks like he's suspended, and I think there's one other player that I haven't quite checked.
Isaac.
Yeah, he's out. Is also out. So how do you think that improves our chances going up to Newcastle?
Firstly, is Wilson fit?
It's a very good question. I believe he is. I haven't seen anything to state that he is.
He scores every time, doesn't he?
He does love a goal against West Ham, yeah.
The only thing I would say is Newcastle are going to come on to us, which might suit us. Like when teams come on to us, it's going to benefit us. Obviously, them players are key to them. Like I think Bruno is definitely key to them. He's been a major player for them all season, and to not have him there is like Declan Rice not being there for us. So it all depends how it affects them rather than what we do, really. If it affects them in a negative way, then we can get something out of the game. I would like West Ham to go 4-3-3. I don't like the three at the back, the wing backs. I just think it's too defensive, and I don't think we've got the players. Like I've always said that we haven't got the players to do this system. I think we've got good defenders, don't get me wrong, but I think West Ham are better when they're on the front foot, like attacking teams, rather than trying to sit back, defend, and trying to hit a team on the break. Do you know what I mean? We've done that for many times in the pandemic season in the 4-2-3-1 system, and it was good. And this season, as Scout says, I want to see something. I want to see something fresh that I've not seen. So I think if we can win the midfield, because their midfield obviously is going to be weak now, and we can overpower midfield. If it means you've got to play Souček, Rice, and Paqueta as a free, then so be it. Just to dominate that midfield area. But would I see him doing it? I just don't think David Moyes is the man to change when in a free hit. Because to me, this game it's a game we want to win. Don't get me wrong, but to go up there, we should be going at this as it's all or nothing basically. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think me and Scout have had this conversation many a times, just in DMs, in that if ever there was a time to take risks or to be a risk taker, now is the time. Also, the transfer window was also an opportunity to, for once, have that less, I guess, methodical or dithering, as some others would frame it, kind of attitude, and actually be like, you know what, we need to take chances. We need to take a leap on one or two players to essentially see if a risk can come off, because we're in a state where playing it safe may also result in us going down as well. So I agree, going up to Newcastle, we do have to go at them. We do have to take the game to them, but obviously we need to be calculated in that because of the pace they have. But what about you, Scout? How would you approach it? What do you think about the game?
I think the key thing for us is going to be how we play between the lines. Like with Newcastle, we don't want to be pumping balls into their box because they've got Shaw, Dan Burn, Botman. They're going to deal with that easily. Yeah. Like they're all going to beat Antonio in the air. We all know it. So what we need to do is we need to get Paqueta and players like that in the positions where they can play that little ball in behind for Antonio or Bowen to allow us to get on the other side of them to have a chance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is about stretching that defence. And I think Newcastle so far have gone 19 games without conceding in the first half, I think. So it's an impressive defensive kind of setup.
That's why I would play Bowen on Saturday. I think balls over the top and balls down the sides for me would be perfect for West Ham. I think Botman's an excellent defender, right? I think Newcastle getting him, they've done their own work in getting that man. But I think Shaw can be got at. I think Shaw's he's a good defender, but he can make mistakes. Yeah, he's very rash. And I think if you can get on target him, or if Antonio is on him. If Antonio goes up against Botman, he's losing that. I think if he goes up against Shaw, I think that's definitely a 50-50 in my opinion. So balls down the side and over the top. But West Ham just don't play balls down the side anymore or over the top for the players to run onto. But we might see it once or twice, and then we don't see it the rest of the game. And I do agree with what Scout says. Any ball that goes down the side, and if we start crossing balls in within the first 5 minutes, then I don't know. I just don't know what the game plan is. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, totally true. So do you think, obviously, the window's just closed as well? We're now going into these important games. I'm pretty sure I know the answer. It's going to be from both of you. But do you think that it was an opportunity lost, or do you think it's more a board looking at the current situation, looking at the manager and going, don't trust him with funds because he may not be the manager in the summer? And should we stay up, we don't want to burden the new manager with his players?
I think they're gambling. If you want me to be truthfully honest, when I see other teams doing business, I look at Forest, I look at Southampton, look at Leeds. These are all teams around us that are in that sort of mix. Wolves. I think West Ham are gambling here. They really are. I think someone said it earlier on today on Twitter, and I listened to what they were saying, and I thought, I don't agree with that. They're looking at Moyes and saying, can Moyes, can the players that Moyes has got keep us in the league? I think the players can. I don't think Moyes can, and that's the difference. I think we've got the players there. If we can get Cornet back in his team, that's pace. That's what we need. We need someone who can run in behind and over the top and different. But I am nervous about this because I think you're gambling in hoping that he's going to keep us in the league. Now, if this goes wrong, this could ruin us really, and we could go down. Do I think we will go down? Ask me after the next 3 games, and I'll tell you if I think we will go down. Because if we, as I say, if we get blitzed against them 3 teams, then I don't see how we can. We're putting all our eggs in one basket to beat the teams around us, and that's a stress that we don't need at West Ham.
Yeah, I've got a follow-up question to this afterwards, but I'd just be interested to hear what Scout's got to say.
Well, on that point, what you said about obviously us being blitzed, I think that's the only reason Moyes is doing the job. We haven't really been blitzed. Do you know what I mean? We haven't really been thumped where you thought, God. And I think that's why they've clung on to him, thinking, right,
I think it's
more just a bit of luck, you know.
Yeah, I think it's more.
I hate that word.
I think it's more the case. When I say blitzed, I mean like outplayed.
Of course, I understand that. Yeah,
like if we're going up there and let's be honest, Newcastle are passing the ball around us. Fabianski's making save after save and keeping us in the game. Like to me, and I have this argument with West Ham Online, who comes on my channel frequently. Like he's a member of like my little panel, and we had this argument all the time. And he says to me, like, but we didn't play bad. And I think, well, if you keep losing games 1-0, it don't matter how bad. It don't matter, does it? Because you're losing the games, you're losing the points. So
I think often we didn't also play good. It's the counter argument to it. Is that it's sometimes that as well. But yeah, sorry, go on. I interrupted. Yeah, go on.
No, it's but that's what it is. Like I just look at it like that, and I just need to see something from West Ham. Like we've won 5 games this year, and really, if you was to analyse them 5 victories, we've been lucky in about 3 of them. Like, and I don't mean lucky as in to say that we didn't deserve to win, because we were better. We was the better team against Bournemouth. We was the better team against Fulham. But we had a lot of run in them games to get the goals that we got to win them games. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and I am nervous about that. I really am.
Yeah, we have had obviously in the case of Antonio's I think the 3rd goal, wasn't it, against Fulham last year in the handball, but because it was then a second phase because the goalkeeper saved it.
Yeah.
It then, as everyone said, it was the most Antonio goal of Antonio goals because of just the fact that it was a pretty blatant handball. But then having said that, there was also a potential red card incident as well on the challenge on him that resulted in that. But it's obviously a massive pain. But when obviously you made the point around, and you both made it, that because we haven't been thumped, because we haven't been hugely outplayed, not only on the pitch, but also via the scoreline, Moyes is still in. I guess the question is, when do we run out of patience as a club? When should we be looking to move on? I know what my opinion is, and I gave that my opinion yesterday on that one. But, if we are to move on, when do we do that? And who then do we look to bring in? Because one of those options, Sean Dyche, is now at Everton. And if
It
you
should have
see,
already happened. It should have already happened, to be fair. Like now, I think they've got to stick with him to the end of the season. They've kind of put themselves into that corner of, right, all the eggs are in this basket now. But and then they haven't backed 100% in the window. Or whether that's Moyes' decision to not do it, I don't know. Are you telling me if he gave his top 3 players that he would have wanted in January, the board would have gone, here you go? I don't know the ins and outs, but I feel we've had chances over the World Cup just before the window started, and they haven't taken it.
I think what you said last night, Mike, I think you hit the nail bang on it, really. When you turned around and said that they're very sentimental to David Moyes in regards of Sullivan and Gold, and like they didn't want to let him go, sort of thing. For me, the Leicester game was the final straw with me. I think the Palace game was just brewing, and the Leicester game was just the final one. And considering how bad Leicester were, and still are to this day, they just completely kicked our ass that day. Like, really did, and we didn't really do nothing. I agree. Like, they had 6 weeks. You could have got a manager in. If you're an ambitious owner of a club and you've got £160 million worth of talent you've spent going up, you bring in a new manager. You don't worry about £6 or £7 million. And I've had this debate before on different channels. And I've turned around and said, West Ham will go and spend £160 million in the transfer market. They won't go and spend £10 million on a manager that could make us a lot better. Do you know what I mean? Like, and bring in and attract players to the club who will benefit us long term. Do you know what I mean? It's always like a short term thing. You know what I'm saying?
What other owner in the league would have stuck with him this long after the money that he spent?
I think what it is where GSB are selling up, or Sullivan is going to be selling up in the sort of this year, because he is going to go, right? There's no two ways about that. I think an ambitious owner, if Kadinsky's in charge, he's gone after the Leicester game. If that was Daniel Kadinsky, I think he says that enough's enough, right? And he'll go and get another manager. Because it's the perfect time. You've got like a mini pre-season. You've got the transfer window coming up. The Arsenal game would have been a free hit, and the Brentford game would have been the home game. Big atmosphere. Let's kickstart our season. It's the only thing I can say is it's the West Ham way. Do things cheap and cheerful, and try and just try and get away with it. The problem
that's
is
why we never appoint a manager that's in a job.
Yeah. But listen. The way I look at that is there's no ambition here, and that all goes back to mentality also. But I look at mentality at this club, and it irritates me a little bit, because as fans, we want to see West Ham do well. And when people complain about the mentality or anything like that, people say, well, go and support another club. Well, West Ham don't do that. And I find that highly offensive, really, because... Hello, Irons. I find that highly offensive, because I look at that and think, well, wait a minute, I want it to happen here. Like, I think sometimes the fan base, in my opinion, don't push hard enough for quality. It's always, we get a Sean Dyche, or we get a David Moyes, or we get Sam Allardyce. It's always someone like that, when it should be another level. Like, do you know what I mean?
The comfort of the known, I think, is what it is.
Yeah.
And this is not a derogatory comment against our fan base, but I don't think necessarily some of our fan base don't know the wider football world, and don't maybe outside of European competitions, or outside of even South America, some of the profiles of managers that are out there, and the next generation of these managers. And I think it's that comfort and that comfortability, and that they've seen what Big Sam did, kept us in, helped us progress slightly when we came back up. Obviously, we went then to Pellegrini. That didn't go so well. We went back to Moyes. When Bilic went. Yeah. And I think the problem is, when every time we've gone for a foreign manager in recent years, it's spoiled, and then we've gone back to a British manager to steady. And I think there's that mindset that a British manager is what West Ham need, in which for West Ham to go to the next level, whereas it's maybe actually those managers are not the right fit, and also those managers have had certain things offered to them during their initial phase of being a manager that wasn't then available in later years, and they've had to.
What it is, Mike, right? what I find, this is what I sort of hear, and where I do the spaces and everything, I do speak to a lot of people. And they bring up Pellegrini quite a lot and say, "Oh, we've tried that top class manager, it didn't work." And I'm thinking, Manuel Pellegrini was done in England. He went to China, and he was going nowhere with his career. A bit like Rafa, Benitez. He went to China and etc. So, like, I want to see someone young. Like, I look at William Still, who's out in France. Yeah. And if someone said to me right now, James, would you rather have an experienced manager who's been there and done it, or would you rather have an up-and-coming manager? You might have it hard for a few years, but in 5 years' time, your team's going to be mint. Like, I could sit there and go, I'd rather have the long-term plan rather than the short-term sort of manager where if he don't go, it don't work out, he's out the door in 2 years. You know what I'm saying? So that's my opinion on that.
The thing I always find interesting about Pellegrini, Doorway Scout, I'm going to bring you in slightly on to have a chat as well, is that there's a lot again, much kind of belied about what he did at West Ham. But we've also got to remember that he spent a lot of money in that first year because he had to bring in players. Obviously, Felipe Anderson was an integral part of that first season, and we did well. Second season, his goalkeeper got injured. He was forced to take the 2 goalkeepers that he had. Let's not forget, a very well-known West Ham fan site was very much bragging by the fact that we didn't go and spend $2.5 million on Mendy, who went to Chelsea for $24.5 million like a year later, and that we got these 2 players for absolutely nothing. When it all went wrong, it was all the manager's fault. It was his first choice goalkeeper wanted over Fabianski, and all of that stuff came out. But on top of that, it's the players that he wanted to sign were an indication of it was a team half built. He wanted Grimaldi from Benfica. He was after João Felix before anyone was aware of João Felix. But they'd asked for 40 million quid, and we said, no, we're not going to pay his release clause. Lo and behold, the year after, he gets sold for £108 million to Atletico Madrid. So there's people saying that how Pellegrini was terrible, but he was trying to build something, and he had the rug pulled out from under him. He did sign some players that weren't great, but they were a necessity because he needed a player, and he was told this was the budget. So the 2 goalkeepers were purely because they were necessities. Same with Carlos Sanchez. It was a necessity to have a backup. And for all of what people say, Declan Rice wouldn't be the player he is now if it wasn't for Pellegrini. He put him in a defensive midfield, not centre-back. And the other thing was he threw him in the deep end. We've seen a lot of people, there's a lot of conversation about the youth system and so on about it being a feeder for the lower leagues. Ultimately, it arguably is in, Premier League kind of academies. But Declan Rice wouldn't have got a chance today based on what fans are saying, because Declan Rice is at the same level when he came through as the likes of Divine Mbamba. Like, he isn't any better. He make mistakes. He looked at times a bit nervy. And if we look at that first Liverpool game when he went into midfield, god awful. He was terrible in that game. But he knuckled down because he had a manager who challenged him, said, you are not going out on loan. You're way too good for a loan deal. You're not championship level, you're Premiership level. Now go prove it. And when he gave him his chance, he was like, I'm not letting this go. And it's that kind of thing that Pellegrini did. And he also improved Antonio. Let's not forget that. Antonio's technical ability incredibly improved under Pellegrini. So there were players that got improved and did well. But ultimately, he's remembered for what was ultimately a farcical 6 months, punctuated by Roberto, the clown. And, when players were then starting to come back from injury, he wasn't given the time. Obviously, Moyes came in and took us elsewhere. But who's to say Pellegrini wouldn't have done the same when he had his players come back from injury? It's a bit of that sliding doors moment where if you look at the Pellegrini piece, he wasn't afforded any luxury in terms of being able to ride it out and see how it goes. David Moyes has. And his record this season was worse than what Pellegrini's was. So I always find it an interesting parallel how Pellegrini is so talked down where Moyes is talked up. But because we obviously got into Europe, the credit in the bank conversation is something that's prevalent massively.
Yeah, that credit in the bank, mate. Yeah, I think the bank's gone bankrupt now. Like, honestly, I hear that all the time. I do. But do you know what I think it is? And it ain't no disrespect to any younger fans, but they've never seen it that good. It's as simple as that. They've never seen West Ham that good in them 2 years.
I was really that days. Finishing
That's what I'm
fifth.
saying. So
Fantastic football.
So, like, they're going to be sentimental. That's one thing with West Ham, what West Ham do have at the minute, and they've got to cut this out. They're very sentimental with managers and they're very sentimental with players. Very. I look at Brighton's model of how they do things. Like, would we accept it? Probably not, because we're so sentimental with players. But Brighton just get rid of a player for a large amount of money and then go and bring another player in, and it doesn't matter. It's about Brighton. It's not about like X or Y or Z. Do you know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
Hi, B. Welcome to the show, mate. And you got yourself on mute. Now. How's it going, mate?
Very well, thank you. I'm so sorry. I've been stuck in horrendous peak time traffic on the way home. I duly apologise. I'm genuinely so sorry.
That's all right. No worries. We were just obviously talking about Moyes and the credit in the bank conversation, and just the general state of West Ham at the moment. But Scout, I'm just going to pass over to you for a minute because obviously you haven't had much chance to have a chat, right? Because I've kind of taken over a little bit. But what are your views on this kind of credit in the bank and the way Moyes' season in comparison to say Pellegrini's season, bearing in mind the parallels, how it's been kind of viewed by the fans and also essentially by the board, really?
Well, with Pellegrini's time, we all really, really enjoyed the first season, and we enjoyed, like, with him. We had like Zabaleta come down and people like that, and they all kind of, I don't know what it was, but for a change, we saw like an older player coming from a top club and really giving his all. Do you know what I mean? How many times did we see players like Lundberg and people like that come to us just for the last payday and not care at all?
Well, Arbeloa is a prime example.
Yeah. We saw players like that. But when we got like Zaba come down, give 100%. Felipe was there. He was performing really well. I mean, I remember that Southampton away game. He absolutely bossed it that day. Got 2 goals. We had players, and he brought in players like Haller. Trust me, in the right formation and the way he was used, we could have had a player there. We could have had a real player. It's just like now, really, like you say, with Anderson and Haller, you see similarities between Paqueta and Scamacca, but we just, as a club, don't know how to use them. That's what it seems like. When like Moyes first brought in Paqueta, he kept talking to him about he's Brazil's number 10. Well, he wasn't Brazil's number 10. He was number 8. So if you're spending that much money and you don't even know where the player plays, it's a bit worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of with Snodgrass when he was Bilic, when Bilic asked him, where do you want to play or where's your best position?
Yeah, when he was coming on or something. Yeah. He said, where do you want to go? Reminds
me a bit of that. Before we just get on, thanks very much, Mick. Really appreciate it, mate. Glad you're enjoying the show. But Ibby, it's been an interesting month again for us. How are you feeling about this month? And what kind of what are your pains? Because of every West Ham fan at the moment, there are pains and probably more than there are positives at the minute.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't really expect much from this January window, I'm going to be honest, after £160 million spent. But also, I know that we're not really a club that are active in the January window, and unlike the summer window, we're just not a serious club in terms of preparation. So for us to get things done in 30 days is pretty impossible, to be honest. I didn't really expect much from the window. To be honest, I know a lot of people weren't happy, but I'm actually happy with Danny Ings. Obviously, in West Ham fashion, he got injured, but I'm actually happy in terms of a short-term fix, maybe for this season and next season as an option. I'm actually really happy with that. I think he's a player that he's good in terms of technical ability. His passing range is good. Link-up play is good. He's a good finisher. I think overall I'm happy with that. But I think there's certain positions that just constantly get neglected at West Ham. Like the fullback positions, they're just like, we've had Creswell now since 2014, and it's just like we're not going to try Emerson as a left back and a back four, it's like we completely limit ourselves to playing one formation. And then sort of Soufal's better as a right back than he's a wing back. So it's like you can't play a four at the back because Creswell's so bad and exposed, and you can't play a five at the back because Soufal's so his distribution so poor, and his outlet. So it's just like there's players there, like for example Tariq Lamptey he was available from Brighton. It's just we West Ham we never go for the glaringly obvious options. I mean, I will not have anyone say to me that Dan Juma's. I know there is questions on the attitude. I respect that, but in terms of a short-term loan until the end of the season, a explosive, direct left winger striker can play on the right wing as well. I mean, we just seem to neglect glaringly obvious options to go out and get. It's just really frustrating. But looking at the squad, if we didn't sign anyone in the January window, I wouldn't expect West Ham to go down, and that's purely because I think we genuinely. I keep saying it, and I've said it to you a lot, Mike, that we have such a good squad of players. There's so many good players in our team, but there's just certain positions that get neglected, and once they get upgraded, we're onto something really good. But in the January window, I mean, overall, I wasn't expecting too much. So even Danny Ings itself, I'm pretty pleased with because I didn't expect any signings, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it was it was a bit of a funny situation, wasn't it? Obviously, much talks about that with signing Danny Ings, and we're also still looking at Moffey. But obviously, once we signed Ings and Moffey wasn't happening, that 20 million or 30 million that was there, again, seemed to just fade away into the ether. As often as seems to be the case with West Ham, that there's these figures and the money that we have, and then it just seems to just slightly fade away. Like last season when we had 100 million to spend in January, apparently, and then we didn't spend it, did we? They went and spent money in the summer, but you could argue that money was paid forward by the outgoing Declan Rice in the summer and what they're anticipating that we're getting. So it just feels again a bit like a missed opportunity. Did the same last season.
I must just say, Mike, as well, is I've obviously read certain things from quite good sources in terms of West Ham, and I'm just really worried about. I mean, I think in order for the West Ham to maybe progress as a club, we might need to sell Declan Rice, as crazy as it sounds. Sometimes you need to get rid of your best player to actually overall improve as a club and as a team. Because if we can get good money for Rice, we can then buy two players in his position and buy two good fullbacks and buy another striker and another winger. And all of a sudden, you've got your money from Europe, you've got your money from the Premier League, you've got your money from deals, you've got your money from tickets, you've got your money from sponsors, then you've got that added chunk from Rice. So you've got a lot of money in the bank to spend. But I'm really worried about him going now because Moyes was on his last legs and we didn't even draw up a list of potential replacements. We just heard Rafa, and we know Rafa has been on the list for the last 5 years. We know Rafa's been there for a long time. That's just a fantasy that David Sullivan has about Rafa. So there's just a lack of planning at the club, and this feeds into the whole Red Bull idea, which is just it's laughable. It's just laughable. This whole Red Bull idea is laughable, and I think Rice going could be a positive for West Ham in terms of actually growing as a club and the overall team. Let's be honest, the lack of planning and diligence, I'm not confident. I'm worried we're going to sell Declan Rice and we're not going to replace adequately. Because if we sell Rice, we could easily get two midfielders of genuine, real quality. And I don't really trust the club, and I don't trust the owners. But also at the moment, I don't have the faith in David Moyes to replace him adequately.
Yeah,
I've got a good question for you boys. Actually,
go ahead, Tom.
So,
far away.
Obviously, we've talked about Rice leaving, and we all know it's coming this summer. And you can put a positive spin, negative spin, whatever you want to do. But who would you all personally make the next captain at the club? Would you buy someone to be a captain, or would you say there's someone at the club glaringly obvious that should be the next captain?
I say for me, I don't think there are many leaders in world football anymore. I don't think you have necessarily those characters are. I think there's such a dime a dozen that it's very difficult to find one of those. I personally think if I'm looking at the team, I'm looking at who's probably going to be there for the long term and someone that can potentially be relied on. My view probably actually is, someone like a Gerd or someone actually like Pablo, to be honest. Mainly because, again, whilst Gerd is new, we just have to look the way he marshals that defence. I don't think you can rely on Zuma to be a captain. And I also don't think it go down very well after his extracurricular activities that he had. And with Fornals, it's a bit like with Parker. He's a player that will lead by doing, maybe not by screaming, shouting, and so on, but it's a player that will put in maximum effort. And that effort in itself can be a motivation. But I don't think within the squad there are many leaders. Obviously, if Ogbonna leaves again in the summer, which looks like it, I personally wouldn't extend his contract, if I'm being completely honest. But again, if and when he goes, you are losing a leader in that dressing room and someone on the pitch that is a kind of that kind of player. But I think we're limited in our squad, and I think there's also limited within the market to go out and buy a leader. I just don't think that's something that is as readily available as it used to be in football. I think you used to have a lot of characters and a lot of leaders, but I don't think it's something that's really around anymore. I don't know what you guys feel.
For me, for Gued's the man, mate. He's the one. He's a quality centre half. He's a leader of men. Like, you've only got to look at Morocco's team in the World Cup. He was in that back line for most of their games, and he got injured towards the back end of the games. He speaks multiple languages, so he can bring people together. He's a worker. He's not a person that you can go and sort of put as captain. He ain't going to be in the spotlight. But he's the man, mate. He's the one. I can't praise this geezer up enough. I covered him in the summer when we signed him. I said, you know what, we've got a talent, and I think you have to build a team around him. Mm-hmm. Pablo, for me, is inconsistent for me. That's the only thing with him. I don't see Aguerd being inconsistent at all. I think Aguerd will put in top performances every time he plays because he's that sort of player. And like you say, I see someone say about Flynn Downs. Flynn Downs will be the future captain of West Ham, but just not now. But we've got a problem because we've got so many players like Cresswell or Bonner who are coming to the end. You can't really give a captaincy to someone who could be leaving in a year's time. Mm-hmm. So if it was me personally, I would go with Aguerd as the captain, and I think he'd be a brilliant captain for us. I really do.
Yeah. What about you, Ibby?
It might sound a bit controversial here because there isn't many options. I am right in saying that Aaron Cresswell has got an extra year on his contract.
I believe there's been talk that he's agreed a 1-year extension, but it's not official. So you have to assume at this point it's not.
But what it is, you've got the English rotor in it. Is it the English pro thing with?
Yes, and you have to have, as part of our qualification, you have to have 8 homegrown players in your team. If we are in Europe, you have to have 8 in total, but 4 of those homegrown players need to be from your academy.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that Cresswell will be here next season. I've got a feeling. So personally, I would say, as club captain, just like Martin Noble was last season, I'd have Aaron Cresswell as the club captain, purely based off the fact that he's been here for quite a while. He knows the club inside out. He's well liked in the dressing room. He's a bit. There's on numerous occasions he's a vocal in the dressing room. But not only that, is he could be a liaison between Mark Noble and the players, because him and Noble are actually very close. It's not a secret that Mark Noble and Aaron Cresswell are very, very close. So I'd like to see Cress as sort of a club captain liaison, sort of somebody in the dressing room. And so I'll just give
it just to challenge that. Would you not say that, rewarding Cresswell based on loyalty and the fact he's been a servant is actually just remaining the status quo, not actually challenging the squad? That's something we've maybe seen in that we've had a line of succession from Noble, from Kevin Noland down to Noble, to Rice, and if we go to Cresswell, it's just this line of succession of the old boys, and we're maybe not challenging that status quo. And we're not maybe promoting a different voice, a voice that maybe is more focused on winning. No disrespect to Cresswell or anything, or even Noble, but I don't think they were necessarily voices of winners, or voices of players that had that mentality of, when they say I'm going out to win this game, they actually mean it, rather than, the customary cliches.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Mike. I think it's a great point that you've made there. But the reason why I would is because I'll just give Gerd that extra year just to like concentrate purely on his football. But the thing is, if you told me that Cresswell was going to be starting next season as club captain, I'd rather sell him. I'd rather, if Cress is going to be here next season as sort of a player that's going to be rotation, playing the cup, playing sort of minimal games, fill in if we've got an injury here and there, play minimal games, but be the club captain, the overall captain. If he's on the pitch, then he's the captain, but he plays minimal games, then I would like to give a Gerd like what happened last season where Rice was the on-field captain, but Mark Noble was the club captain, the overall club captain for the club. And that's the way I would want it to work personally. If I could have a choice, if Cress is still in the plans of, if Moyes is still here next season, which I don't think he will be, regardless of what happens, I do think Moyes will part ways in the summer. If Moyes is here, then I would like to see Cress sort of as the club captain, as a liaison between the players and Mark Noble and the board, because I know that him and Mark Noble are very close. But I think long term, Gerd is the one you look at as sort of a general at the back. Gerd's a Rolls Royce, don't get me wrong. But I'd just like to give him that extra year just to bed in and sort of concentrate purely on the football and getting used to playing for West Ham. I mean, look, I know people are going to completely disagree with me on the Cresswell one, but that just makes me feel comfortable inside. If Cresswell was overall club captain but just played minimal games, because I don't think personally Cresswell can start he can't start this season personally for me. For the rest of the season, I wouldn't like to see him start. I think Emerson has sort of stamped that place down now.
That's why I would challenge you in that sense of that. If he's not good enough to start because of his playing ability, is he good enough to lead? Is my kind of my view on that.
Yeah, I completely get what you're saying with that, but I think with Mark Noble last season, the playing ability was completely gone as well. I don't think his playing ability was great. I think he obviously was in his last season. I think Cresswell, I don't think his playing ability is as good, but I think if we lose Ogbonna, if we lose, let's say, Fabianski, if we lose whoever, I think we've got a couple of other players, Lanzini. I think if we lose too much in one goal, it could be quite a lot for us. And I know, look, Cresswell, it's so hard because he's done really well for us, but obviously he's done now personally for me. But I don't think we can lose too many players. I don't think we can lose too many players.
I've got to ask you this though, right? I know you're saying about Cress as club captain, but wouldn't you rather someone younger, fresher, as the sort of the club captain and going right down that route? If you don't agree with sort of a Gued, now I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I do. But I look at Flynn. Flynn's one of us. Like Flynn fights for the shirt because not only is he a player at West Ham United, he's a fan. So he wants to do it. And do you know what? I won't even be against giving it to Flynn. Because I know for a fact Flynn would put in performances week in, week out and have a go week in, week out.
I agree. I agree with you there with Flynn in terms of his commitment, but I think that would completely hinder Flynn Downs' game, personally. I feel, look at Declan Rice. Rice has been immense this season. Has he been as good as he was last season? I think there's a conversation to be had about Rice in terms of he has been brilliant, but he's also been a level above last season. He's been a level above. And I think the captaincy Declan Rice has said himself, the captaincy has weighed down on him a little bit.
That's fair enough. And I admire your ability to want players to stay. I'm quite unsentimental when it comes to the team. Personally, I would make wholesale changes in the summer because I think we need it. I'd be quite happy to, like the likes of Lanzini go, Soufal, Ogbonna. And I know it's huge changes and we're losing a lot of players, but I think the only way sometimes you can hit that refresh is to out with the old and in with the new. That can include a manager, can include a board. I do think that maybe we, as like a relegation, you hit a reset, you essentially lose a lot of players and you bring in almost a whole team. We're not saying that we're going to do that because obviously we've seen with Nottingham Forest, bringing a whole team is just mental kind of idea. But in some cases, we may be grown too attached to these players, and that's maybe why we are not reaching the next level because we are holding on to players for too long. And we do talk about it. Well, this player's been here a long time, so they probably deserve a chance. And I like Flynn Downs, but personally, I don't believe if we want to be a top 6 team, he is a top 6 player and that he's a player that should be our captain. I think he has a lot of potential, but I don't believe he is a player that takes you to a next level. When you look around Europe, players of the same age or younger that are far more rounded as a player and offer a lot more, like the Kepran Thuram, for instance. Granted, he's drawing attention from Liverpool, but if you start to look around Europe and compare players in that same position, they are much more rounded and higher ceiling players. And that's kind of where I get to when I look at Downs and I look at where we say we want to be. We have to actually start to go, is that player going to take us there? Or is he a player that we have an affinity to because of their connection to the club?
But where do you, just to counter that, where do you see West Ham then? Because the way I look at it is with Flynn, I agree with what you're saying. Flynn's not that sort of, he's that sort of level where he's a decent player for us, but he wouldn't be a decent player in a top 6 side. If that makes sense. I think he'd be massively out of his depth. But the problem is with us, we're not a top 6 side. We're
that's also mentality, though. That's mentality of us as fans, mentality us as a squad, which is why I say the likes of Cresswell. Maybe you have to look past that because the mentality is, we'll go out and we'll try and beat these teams. You need players with a mentality of, no, we're going to beat this team. If I don't beat this team, we're not good enough. And that as a fan base, as I said the other day, is that people are using where we were in that relegation year as the barometer for how well Moyes has done. Rather than, the last season we finished 6th, the next season we finished 7th. So we finished in a lesser competition, finished 1 place off. And over the course, because we prioritised and didn't rotate enough, we dropped out, we dropped down. So technically, was it a progression? Was it a failure? In terms of where we were, arguably we maintained and we consolidated. Whereas this time we've gone backwards. So again, we need to get back to where we were, which was that place. If we have to set higher benchmarks, not only as a fan base, and we also have to change our mentality of, well, we're only West Ham. That in itself is why we go in these situations, these cycles, and where we actually look at players and go, no, but that's a player. And it's like, yeah, but is that the player that takes you to where you say you want to be? And then you have to take that emotional attachment out of it because it becomes essentially a bias that, and I understand why people love Flynn Downs because he does battle, he works hard. He is a guy completely committed to playing for the club. He's much like Noble in that respect. So an affinity is obviously going to be there. But when you take out all of the passion and you say you want to be a top 7 side, and yet you say you want Flynn Downs to be your leading captain, you want him to be the kind of the anchor of your midfield, and you want to kind of not look at any others, for instance, in the market, do you actually believe you want to be a top 7 side, or are you just accepting that this is a player that I because I like them as a person, that I want them there? That's where I kind of come into it.
Everyone needs a Flynn Downs in their team. That's one thing I will say. He's one of us. He will fight for the shirt. He's not a bad passer of the ball. He passes the ball very, very well. I think there is potential there. 100%. I've spoke to a few Swansea fans before, and they've said that they couldn't stop raving about him. I know it's the Championship, but then Jared Bowen comes from the Championship and all, and so there is. I think he's got potential. Do I think he's top 7 material? No, we need more. I totally agree. I really do. But then when you do look at the team and you strip away the team that sort of the defence basically is really a problem. And the wing backs and the system that we're trying to play, West Ham are miles behind now. And in a case of sort of 18 months ago, from where we was 18 months ago to where we are on this current day, it's night and day where West Ham should be. West Ham should be up there competing in and around it, where Brighton are and where other teams are. But West Ham are nowhere near it this year. And that really is because basically this is an aging side, and West Ham, this red ball model that we kept hearing about was the biggest load of ball I've ever read in my life.
Yeah. I'm going to bring you in on this in a second. But just like the last thing there is obviously say where we want to be. And if we look at comparison as to Newcastle at the moment, is having the season that we expected to have, quite frankly. Yeah. But then obviously if we're talking about Downs being a replacement for Rice, you look at Newcastle, their anchor is Gimaresh, absolute top quality. Yes, he's a couple of years older than Downs, but if we want to get to that level, that's the type of player you need in that position, who has the ability to spray passes and to do essentially everything, can score goals as well. Downs is very good at many aspects, but there's other aspects that if you want to be at that top end that you really need. And he's not like a Kante is as a defensive midfielder. He's very, very good at what he does, but is he that player that gives you that little extra edge in those games to take you on? I don't know. But Scout, what are your views on, potentially say Flynn Downs as a captain? Do you see him as a long-term starter? Would you look for better in the summer?
I think Flynn's always going to be a squad player personally, in and out of the team. Don't get me wrong, I think he's great for the dressing room because we all know, like you say, one of us is always going to give 100%. He is a good passer. He's a great passer. I like the way he sprays possession around and keeps the ball, and his energy and his tough tackling. But I just don't, like you say, he hasn't got that next level in him. I don't personally believe to be, if you wanted to be pushing for Europe all the time, to have him in there, like you say, Bruno Guimaraes, someone like that. But personally, I'm glad that two of you said it, because my choice of captain would be Aged. So
yeah, and also we've got to look at it. Flynn Downs is only 24 years old, by the way.
Yeah,
and we're talking about him. We're talking about him as a young player. He's 24 years old. He's old. He's the same age as Declan Rice. Sorry, he's a year older than Declan Rice. So when we're talking about potential, he's a year older, and Declan Rice is a world-class player, and we're on about Flynn Downs replacing a world-class player. It's a huge request
but whoever goes in there, though, Mike's going to find it hard, don't they?
It absolutely is. But this is why, again, Ibby made a great point earlier in selling Rice isn't necessarily a bad thing, because ultimately you can bring in two players who does his outputs, but also they maybe increase on his overall, because if you take, they're doing the same as Rice and say the attacking side, and you have someone who does the same from a defensive side and actually have a bit more of a rounded play and other aspects of their game as well, that ultimately it raises the level of your midfield up. And when you look at it in that respect, it is actually, I personally think Rice going could be quite exciting for West Ham. But I also am in tremendous trepidation about it because of who we currently have at the club in terms of the management, who we currently have at the club in terms of the board. And I know it's not really linked, but when you listen to what Moyes had to say about Mubama around when he was going to look into play him, it was all around he runs hard, works for the team, work rate. Those were the things he talked about, as well as attitude. And it's like, whilst there are admirable qualities and you need them, you need more than just those as your variables as whether someone's good enough to get in. And Downs has all of that, by the way. And Downs isn't even getting in the team over Souček, who has been, quite frankly, terrible for the most of the year. So that's why when I look at Downs, that's how I kind of see it, because that's how it's an interesting one. But obviously, guys, we're going into these 4 games as well. Obviously, we've talked around who could be captain next year and so on. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't ask the question as to, if we go into these next 4, we don't get the right results and we sack, what do we do from manager? I think we all know what Sullivan would do. He'd look at Rafa, because it's the man he's wanted for so long. He's fetishized Rafa for so much that he will be his savior. But who would you go for if you were to look for a new manager? Who would you be looking at?
I think if I'm being honest, there's names like the Celtic manager, Sporting Lisbon manager. There's loads of names out there, and if West Ham was to pay the money, you can get them out of their contract. The only problem is, I don't think you're going to get anyone, mate. And this is someone who's like out of work. If you want someone who's out of work, who's not doing nothing, Luis Enrique would be the man for me. If you said go and get someone who's out of work, decent pedigree, just left Spain, he would be the one. Other than that, I just feel that we've just got to stick with him and hope he keeps us up. Because I think if you go and get another manager who's lesser than Moyes, then what's the point? And if you're going to go and get someone like a Benitez for 6 months, is his heart really in it? Like really? Because if he's in it for 6 months, it's like a free hit for him. He can if he keeps us up, then great. If he don't keep us up, he ends his contract and he goes somewhere else. So I think the boat is well and truly like sailed off into the distance in regards to manager. I think he's here for the rest of the season. The only fear I have is how long do you give him before it becomes unbearable? Like, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah, I agree with Ryan there. He called out a couple of big ones. He obviously called out Postecoglou of Celtic, as you said, and Gallardo, and obviously made the point that Gallardo is actually now a free manager, and obviously just come off the back of the best period of Rivers' history, which would be someone who would definitely instill at least some fun in last final months if he came in.
Our board won't even know who he is, though. Let's face it, our board won't even know who he is.
Possibly true. Although we do have Newman and we were looking at Alvarez. So we should be aware of the manager who was looking at the player. And Moyes didn't want to sign. But obviously, in an ideal situation, Moyes keeps us up, we stay up. I think, I agree. In the summer is probably going to be a time, if then any time we do it. Hypothetical question, guys. Should we just stay up and Moyes wins Europa Conference, or even more unlikely, the FA Cup? Is that enough for you to, as is often the term, trust the process and give Moyes at least one more year? Or would you say, thank you very much, we need to go in a completely different direction?
Yeah, totally agree.
Celtic straight away.
And Mike, I think I keep saying it to you as well myself, Mike, because we're in a massive catch-22 situation as a club at the moment. Now, I would love nothing more than to see us lift the Europa Conference League and see Declan Rice with a trophy, see my beloved side Ben Rama with the trophy lifting it up. I'd love nothing more than that. But at the same time, I know if we win that long term, I know Moyes is here the next season, and I know that the same thing continues. And it's such a if we had a cutthroat board, I think that would benefit us as a club if we had a cutthroat sort of board where we have a dithering board and a dithering type of manager. And so the worst
stubborn board
combination.
Yeah.
So Ibby, just on that, do you believe then in the summer that regardless of what happens, the board will remain and they will not be maybe new investors, new voices in the boardroom, maybe Sullivan taking a back seat and actually handing over the reins to a new potential investor?
Yeah, well, I think that's a huge thing that hinges big time on the future of the club. Obviously, with the sad passing of obviously David Gold, unfortunately, that could play a big part in what happens. Because obviously, you can't really see Sullivan without Gold, sort of thing. And we know that Brady's looking to invest in the future in sort of political career.
Cardiff are needing someone as well, aren't they? At the moment, they're looking to sell.
Yeah, and we all know David Sullivan's a closet Cardiff fan.
There is on my profile on Twitter. There is a video of David Sullivan speaking way back when he was at Birmingham, where he said he would sell Birmingham to buy a London club for the commute. Remember, he said he'd come to us, he supported us. It's actually a genuine interview where he says he'd buy a London club when he sells Birmingham for the commute, and then one day he'll look to buy his boyhood club, Cardiff. Funny how that has all seemed to be almost falling into place, probably later than he expected, but it seems the dominoes are starting to fall, I would suggest.
The thing is, Mike, I don't know if you guys agree with me. Please, everyone, feel free to give your opinion on what I'm saying. Maybe I'm just carrot and blue tints, Ibi, on West Ham, but I really believe that this club's got huge potential. I've seen, obviously, we've had the taste of those Europa League nights. We've had some great nights in Lyon. There's so much potential at this football club. I mean, you look at the teams around us that we should compete with. I mean, like, obviously Newcastle, Brighton, Wolves, Villa. I expect with them sort of squads and the caliber of players they have, the type of teams we will be competing with. We look at to the top end of the table, and I look at their team and I look at our team and I look player for player, and I'm looking at them and I'm thinking we've got player for player better team than all of those teams I've mentioned. But I think the direction, the management, and the way that the players, the way that what and maybe another manager like a Postecoglou could get out of our players, like a Tedesco, like Anarim, could get out of our squad. I don't think like the full potential is obviously being reaped out, like is sort of being achieved from the squad. And I'm looking at, obviously we've got Newcastle on Saturday, and sort of sounds crazy, but if I look at our team and I look at their team, I really do fancy us. I would, if I didn't know what happened this season, I'd say, you know what, I think we can get a result there. But it's obviously it's a different scenario. But I really do believe with some new owners, maybe a new manager or a change of direction, a board with some ambition, I really do believe this club is going to go serious places. We have the set. I mean, the stadium's a catch-22, but it's a 65,000 seat stadium. Every player that joins the club says, "Wow, what an amazing stadium this is!" And I think there's some huge potential. There's some huge potential at the football club. Obviously, the infrastructure of the academy, I think the training ground, etc., needs to be obviously improved in the club. But there's so much room for improvement. And David Moyes talks about room for improvement a lot, but he's not really trying to make up the room at the moment. So I think the club's got huge potential, but I think we're sort of sleepwalking at the moment when we could really be trying to fulfill our potential, working towards a goal at the moment, which is a bit disappointing.
Yeah, so I guess this is the final point, guys. So I'm just going to open it up to the other guys, EB. So EB makes a fantastic point about us have all of the, I guess, the individual components, individual ingredients in which to be like a sleeping giant, for lack of a better term. How do you guys feel about that? Do you think that we are on the cusp of something with the right board in that are willing to invest? Do you think that we are in a position where we could excel? But do you also think that our fans are willing to wait the time it's going to need in which for a new board to actually do all the requirements we need to essentially awaken a potential giant if we get the right backing and support?
For me, I think we've got the potential, but we've got the mentality. And it all goes back to mentality. Like, have we got the sort of winning mentality? Like, we haven't won a trophy in 43 years. So, like, we haven't really got that. We just accept it. Whatever we get, we accept. And it's like, that's it. One thing, I love him to death, yeah? He was a top lad. One thing I do disagree with him on, though. And when he compares us and he said our squad's better than all the squads around us, I look at our defence and I just don't see it. I see one quality defender in Aguerd. I see a Bono who's aging. I see Zuma who's injury prone. That's three of our defenders, right? And one of them's like top class in Aguerd. I look at the left wing back position. Emerson's good. Don't get me wrong, but we've only just started seeing it. And the right back position, we don't know who's the best right back really. Is it Kufal? Is it Johnson? Right? Is it Kehrer? No one really knows, right? And even Kehrer is suspect at defending. So I look at our defence, look at our goalkeeper. We've got a 38-year-old, 37-year-old goalkeeper in goal when we've got a French international on $100,000 a week sitting on the bench. There's a lot of issues at West Ham. There is. I think if we was going to have another £150 million spend, then I would totally agree. I'd say, you know what, we can do some damage. Will it happen? I don't believe so, mate. Yeah, I mean, the only way that would ever happen is if we can get Sullivan out the door, get an owner in who's ambitious. An owner who will come in and say, within 10 years, I want West Ham to at least qualify for a Champions League or win a trophy or do something like that. Because I say it on my channel, I say it on the Spaces. Like, our away support is phenomenal. Our home support needs working. Like when you go to the LS, I hear so many people say that the atmosphere is terrible. That has to change. If you want to be a side competing all the time, that you got to get the home
Although, would you not
spark.
agree that last season, atmosphere wasn't ever a problem in West Ham fans' minds? It's a problem now because we're playing badly.
I think it was.
I completely agree with that.
I think in Europe it was all right because everyone got up for Europe. But if you go back to last year, no one really cared about the Premier League. And that's where, if you go back from Kidderminster in January last year and start going through all the Premier League games, no one really cared about the atmosphere because everyone was all they was focused on. Oh, we're in Europe, we're going to Seville or Lyon or wherever we're going. Do you know what I mean? So I think the atmosphere's got to change. And the main thing of all what it's got to change from fans to owner to manager is mentality. And the mentality word is and the mindset's got to change. Like West Ham last year to West Ham now, if that is an owner who's ambitious, Moyes would have been gone after the first 8 games, right? And said this is not good enough. They would have acted after like Wolves or Villa or whatever, and just said, you know what? But what it is, where we won them games and we got away with it, is papering over the cracks. So I do agree. West Ham, like, they are an ambitious proposition for someone, but it's on us and all. Because I think some fans just go, you know what, it don't matter. Like, we're going to win this, or like, it don't matter. We're going to stay in the league. There's no guarantees of that. Like, when you look at other teams, and before I round this up, you look at the top teams. None of them are ever in fear of relegation. Like, never. Like, really. And when I see people comparing people to like Guardiola and Man City, and like, we want to try and play like Manchester City, we're nowhere near that level. Like, I want to try and play like West Ham United, not like Manchester City. Do you know what I mean? And the style of play has got to change and all at West Ham. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't even know what style that we're trying to play at West Ham, really. Like, is it counter attack? Is it possession based? So there's a lot of issues, but I do agree. If we can sort that out, get an owner in who's ambitious, right? So let Sullivan go. If Kadinsky's the man, then I think Kadinsky will pump money into his club. I really do. I think he's done it already. I think he'll do it again. As long as he sees a return on his investment, I don't think he cares. And once we get an ambitious owner, then we've got an ambitious team, and then the world is our oyster, basically.
Yeah,
I think like a Newcastle kind of takeover would suit our fan base, where someone comes in, even though let's forget where they're from. Like, I'm talking, if it was us, you know, that kind of takeover. They get rid of a manager, they get in Eddie Howe, they go, right, what do you need? They give him it, and they just go with it. You know, the fans are behind it, the club's there as a whole. You could tell as soon as they took over, it was like a party atmosphere at Newcastle straight away. They knew something special was happening. And I think that's the kind of thing we need.
I agree. I do. I would like to see a long-term plan. Like, I wouldn't like us to go out and just get a manager like because he's won a few things that he's like progressive. Excuse me. The best way of summing it up is Arteta at Arsenal. You look at him. All right, Arsenal took a risk there and said, you know what? Well, we've seen what he can do with Pep. We're going to take a risk on him. And in his first season, and Arsenal fans are very fickle, really, because in the first season, he won the FA Cup for him. They finished 8th, 5th, and then I think this year they're going to win the league. So it's like it's all about progression with West Ham. West Ham seems to go 1 step or 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And it's like, it shouldn't be like that.
It's literally, me and Mike have said before, like, when we've talked about managers, and one of the names I brought up was Enzo Maresca. I just think that kind of person, now he's number 2 at Man City. He's been at West Ham with Pellegrini. He knows our club. He's a very, very good coach. And I think he's going to be ready to step up to be a manager. And it, like you say, it takes a risk to go with someone like that. But we are the kind of club that should take that risk.
Yep, just look at Brighton. Took a risk with Graham Potter, pulled him out of essentially Scandinavian leagues. It wasn't really a risk, to be honest, but they took Zebri away from Sassuolo, brought him in, and then, completely changed the complexion. But obviously, let's round it up there, guys. I think, as we know, there are a myriad of problems at West Ham. We don't know what our philosophy is. We don't know essentially who our best players are in positions because of form is so bad and the lack of opportunities for some players. It's hard to actually distinguish as to who should be playing in these roles. Again, obviously, Rice going next year is a concern because obviously we have concerns around who we could even bring in. And that also leads into the next question of, who do we then bring in as a captain as well, and the lack of leadership. But, we're in a bind at the moment. We're in a difficult period. Obviously, the fans are there. The away support shows that very, very clearly. As was rightly said, as a home crowd, we also need to do our part and step up. I know we need the players as well to give us something to cheer about. But again, when we complain about the atmosphere, we are the creators of an atmosphere. So we have to stand up ourselves and take some responsibility there. But, we've got 3 games now. We need to really be, as a fan base, incredibly united. Even when it comes to the game against Nottingham Forest, that one is going to be huge if these next 3 games don't go so well. But if you've liked the show, guys, please do please do subscribe. Again, if you don't follow these guys on Twitter, please do follow them as well. They're awesome guys. They know their stuff. And it's been great speaking to you lot. Thanks for joining on today. Everyone in the chat as well. Really appreciate you joining. It's been great, awesome. Thanks very much, guys. We will do another phone in next week. Anyone ever wants to join, drop us a message, and we're more than happy to bring you on, have you say around West Ham. But one final time, guys, really appreciate it. Thanks very much for joining the show. And
cheers.
Let's do it again sometime as well, and hopefully we'll have some positive things to talk about in the near future. But thanks very much, guys, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks a lot.